I woke up on my 66th birthday to the familiar hush of my kitchen, the morning sun pooling across the linoleum in soft gold. It was the kind of quiet that used to comfort me, but lately it had taken on a brittle edge. I made coffee the way I always did, 4 measured scoops, a splash of cream, the ritual steadying my hands. On the table, there was only a single card, the bright logo of the store's rewards program smiling up at me. I tried to laugh, but the sound came out thin. I glanced at my phone, its black screen blank and expectant. Laura always used to call before noon on my birthday, even if she was busy, even if she forgot every other holiday. I watched the clock mark each passing hour, hoping she would remember. By lunchtime, I gave up and heated the last of the vegetable stew I'd made 2 nights ago, portioned neatly into a single bowl. I sat alone at the table Franklin built with his own hands, the grains of oak polished smooth by decades of meals and conversations. Once this kitchen had been full of life, Laura's laughter echoing off the walls, Franklin humming while he fixed the faucet or tinkered with the cupboard hinges. I finished my stew, slowly set the empty bowl in the sink, and took the card from the pharmacy in both hands. For a moment, I considered propping it up on the counter just so the house wouldn't look so bare, but instead, I slipped it into the drawer with the spare batteries and rubber bands. In the afternoon, I pulled the old photo album from the cabinet. The cover was worn at the corners, softened by years of touching. I turned the pages carefully, pausing over the pictures of Laura with frosting on her cheeks, Franklin's arm curled around my waist. I traced my finger over her small, smiling face. "When did you decide I was no longer worth remembering?" I whispered. I closed the album and set it gently aside, my hand resting over the cover as if to steady something fragile inside me. The next morning I woke before dawn, the ache in my chest sharper than I cared to admit. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place I'd spent my birthday waiting for a call that never came, and pulled a spiral notebook from the drawer. The cover was plain blue, something I'd bought years ago for grocery lists or household repairs. Instead, I wrote a single word on the first page, absence. I began to list each holiday, each milestone, each day I had waited, Christmas last year and the one before, Easter brunch when she said work was too busy, the Mother's Day when she texted late in the evening after I'd already gone to bed, birthdays that blurred together into the same hollow afternoon. As I wrote, my hand trembled, not from anger, but something heavier, something like grief that had settled into my bones. I paused, pressing the pen against the margin. Part of me wondered if this was petty, if I was cataloging slights just to nurse an old hurt. But I kept going. I thought of all the times I'd said it didn't matter, that she was busy, that she had her own life, all the ways I'd excused her distance, because it was easier than admitting I was lonely. Midway down the page, I stopped and rubbed my palm across the paper. The ink smeared a little, but I didn't care. Sylvie called later that morning, her voice bright with the kind of concern that comes from knowing me too long to pretend. "Did Laura call you back?" "No," I said, my voice soft. "She didn't." There was a pause on the line. "You deserve better." After we hung up, I closed the notebook and rested my hand over it, feeling the quiet weight of every year I had waited. I looked out the window at the bare trees in the yard, the branches reaching toward a sky that seemed too bright for the way I felt. On the counter, my phone lit up with a new notification, and I almost didn't look, until I saw Laura's name beside it. For a moment, hope flared in my chest when I saw her name on the screen. My thumb hovered over the notification before I tapped it open. It wasn't a message. It was a photo Laura had posted publicly, bright and polished, in the way her life always looked online. She stood in the center of a grand dining hall, smiling with a glass of champagne lifted toward the camera. The caption read, "Family is everything." I stared at those words until they blurred. Behind her, I could see a long table crowded with familiar faces, her in-laws, her friends from college, even distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. They were all gathered together under the warm glow of chandeliers. I hadn't known she was hosting anything. There hadn't been a call, not even a perfunctory invitation. I set the phone down and pressed my palm over my mouth. My breathing felt too loud in the quiet kitchen. After a while, I reached for the notebook again and turned to a fresh page. My pen moved almost on its own. "November 14th, family dinner uninvited." I closed the cover and laid it on the table. My hand lingered there, tracing the edge as if it could soften what I already knew. In the afternoon, I pulled the photo up one more time, studying each face. They looked happy, content, as if I had never been part of any of it. The kettle on the stove began to whistle, and I rose to turn off the burner. I poured the hot water over a tea bag, watching the pale color bloom through the cup. My hands felt steadier when I wrapped them around the mug. After dinner, I sat in the living room, the lamp casting a soft circle of light over the chair. I picked up the phone, scrolled back through the photos of the day she was born, the day she graduated, all the little proofs that once I had been at the center of her world. Before I went to bed, I slipped the notebook into the drawer of the side table, telling myself it was the last time I would measure my worth by whether she remembered me. The next morning, I woke before dawn again, the same dull ache in my chest reminding me that something had to change. I made coffee, sipped it slowly, and let the quiet settle around me until it felt almost comfortable. When the sun finally edged over the rooftops, I opened my laptop and typed in the name of the little travel agency downtown. I'd passed it countless times, the window displays filled with glossy brochures for places I'd only ever dreamed of. My hand hesitated over the mouse, but then I clicked the button to make an appointment. I dressed carefully, choosing a blouse I hadn't worn since Franklin's memorial service. As I drove, I felt something steady growing inside me, a resolve I couldn't name. Marta Espinosa greeted me with a warm smile as I stepped through the door. Her voice was gentle, no rush in her questions. "If you could go anywhere, where would you start?" she asked. I opened my mouth, ready to give some practical answer, something modest, instead. My throat tightened, and I pressed my palm to my chest. "I don't know," I said softly. "I've spent so long not choosing anything for myself." She nodded, as if she understood more than I could say. "Then let's start with a list," she offered. "Florence, Vienna, Santorini." The name sounded almost too beautiful to claim, but she wrote each one in tidy script, her pen moving with quiet confidence. "I don't want sensible," I told her finally, my voice stronger now. "I want something I'll never forget." Marcia looked up and smiled, her eyes kind. "Then we'll plan something extraordinary." By the time I left her office, the late morning sun was warm on my shoulders. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone else to tell me I deserved something good. When I reached home, I set the travel folder on the table where the notebook used to sit. I ran my fingers over the smooth cover, feeling a small spark of anticipation I hadn't known I still carried. A week later, I stood by the doorway with my suitcase beside me, heart fluttering in a way I hadn't felt since I was a girl, waiting for the school bus. The sky was still dark, the neighborhood quiet as I locked the door behind me. I had booked the trip in a single afternoon, my hands almost trembling as I read over the itinerary Marta had prepared. Florence first, then a few days in Vienna, ending with a week in Santorini. I hadn't told Laura. Part of me wondered if I should, but then I thought of all the invitations that never came, the messages left unanswered, and decided I owed her nothing this time. As the taxi pulled up to the curb, I took a deep breath. I lifted my phone and snapped a picture of my boarding pass, the bold letters declaring first class. For a moment, I just looked at it, the proof that I had finally chosen myself over the hollow waiting. Then I attached the photo to a message. "Thought you'd like to know where I'll be." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The driver helped me load my bag. I settled into the back seat, feeling the soft vibration of my phone as the first reply came in. I didn't look. I kept my gaze on the streetlight, slipping past each one, marking the distance I was finally putting between me and the years of feeling unnecessary. At the airport, I moved through the lines with a strange calm. My hands didn't shake as I handed over my passport. When the clerk wished me a pleasant journey, I felt something inside me loosen, like a knot finally untying. I found my seat by the window. As the plane taxied toward the runway, I closed my eyes and let the soft roar of the engines fill the last empty space where regret used to live. When we lifted into the sky, I opened my eyes again and watched the ground fall away in slow, silent surrender. By the time I arrived in Santorini, I had almost grown accustomed to the feeling of motion beneath me. The planes, the taxis, the ferries that carried me farther than I'd ever dared to go alone. The last stretch of road wound up the cliffs, whitewashed walls bright against the blue sky. And for a moment, I just closed my eyes and let the breeze touch my face. In my room, I set my suitcase down without any urgency. I unpacked only what I needed, folding each dress into the wardrobe, lining my shoes neatly against the wall. There was something comforting in the simplicity, the small ritual of claiming a space as my own. When everything was in order, I stepped out onto the balcony. The sea stretched below, impossibly vast and quiet. I sat with a glass of chilled wine, my phone resting on the table beside me. It had been buzzing all day. Messages from Laura, a few from Dean, numbers I didn't recognize. I picked it up, scrolled through them without opening any. The preview lines were all the same. "Call me. Where are you? We need to talk." I set the phone face down. Instead, I lifted my own camera and took a single photograph, my hand holding the glass against the backdrop of sunset. The sky glowed with a kind of soft defiance. I typed a caption without thinking. "Sometimes you must be your own celebration." I tapped the button to post it. No explanation, no apology. Afterward, I sat back and let the warmth of the evening soak through me. I sipped the wine slowly, tasting something I couldn't quite name. Freedom, maybe, or the memory of it. When the last light faded and the sea turned dark, I felt no ache to be anywhere else. The messages could wait. Whatever Laura needed from me, it would still be there tomorrow. I finished the last of my wine and carried the empty glass inside, ready to let the night be just mine. In the morning, I woke to soft light filtering through the curtains and the quiet certainty that I didn't have to rush anywhere. I made tea in the small kettle by the sink and watched the first boats cut across the water far below. When I finally picked up my phone, the notifications had multiplied. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and messages lined up in a neat, desperate column. I scrolled past Dean's number and the unfamiliar ones until I saw Laura's name again. Her last voicemail had come in the middle of the night back home. I pressed play, the phone cool against my palm as her voice broke through the early hush. "Mom, please call me back. I don't understand why you're doing this. You can't just disappear." I set the phone aside without deleting the message. It could wait. There was a long pause where she must have tried to steady her breathing. "I know I haven't been around. I know, but this isn't fair. You're my mother." I closed my eyes and let the words settle without rushing to fill the space they left. For so long, I had been the one to call first, to smooth over the rough edges, to pretend the forgetting didn't hurt. Even when I felt small and unneeded, I told myself it was my job to hold everything together. Now, sitting there with the sun warm on my shoulders and the taste of tea lingering on my tongue, I realized I didn't have to reply just because she expected it. I set the phone aside without deleting the message. It could wait. Everything could wait. I dressed and walked down the narrow steps into the village. The streets were already awake. Shopkeepers arranging baskets of lemons, neighbors greeting each other in gentle voices. I wandered without a plan, stopping to look in windows, feeling my heart loosen in small, surprising ways. When I returned to the hotel hours later, I was smiling without noticing it, and my hands felt light as I turned the key in my door. 2 weeks later, I stepped back into my kitchen, the suitcase trailing behind me. The familiar hush of the house wrapped around me, but it didn't feel as heavy as it once had. I set my keys on the counter and ran my hand across the worn edge of the table, feeling the smooth groove Franklin's elbow had made over all those years. I put the kettle on and unpacked, slowly laying each folded dress across the bed before hanging it in the closet. When I reached for my phone again, the screen bloomed with the same list of unanswered messages. Laura's name hovered near the top, her last text, "Waiting. Please come home. We need to talk." I read it twice, then set the phone face down. I made my tea and carried it to the chair by the window, the same spot where I'd spent so many evenings measuring my worth by someone else's silence. But now, the quiet didn't feel like an accusation. It felt like a space I'd finally claimed for myself. A little while later, Sylvie knocked on the door. She didn't wait for me to call her in. She simply stepped over the threshold, arms open. I let her hug me without needing to explain where I'd been. When we sat down, she looked me over as if to be sure I was really all right. "You look different," she said finally. "I feel different," I told her. She reached across and squeezed my hand, her eyes soft and shining. "I'm glad," she whispered. We didn't talk about Laura. We didn't talk about any of it. Not yet. Instead, I told her about the color of the water in Santorini, the warm bread in the little cafe in Florence, the night I fell asleep with the windows open to the sound of the sea. When she left, I stood in the doorway and watched her walk down the front path, feeling a calm I couldn't remember having before. I closed the door behind me, turned the lock, and carried my empty teacup to the sink. 3 days later, I heard the sound of tires crunching over gravel, and I knew before I looked who it was. I set my book down and moved to the window, watching Laura climb out of her car. She stood there for a moment, clutching her purse as if it might anchor her to something solid. I didn't go to the door right away. I waited until she raised her hand to knock. When I finally opened it, she looked smaller than I remembered, her eyes red around the edges. "Mom," she said, her voice thin, "can I come in?" I stepped back, giving her space. She walked past me into the kitchen, her gaze skimming the counters, the sink, the table where I'd spent so many hours waiting for her to remember me. She set her purse down and turned, her hands twisting together. "I didn't know how to call you," she began. "I didn't know what to say." I stayed by the counter, letting her have the silence she needed to fill. "You just left." Her voice cracked. "You didn't even tell me you were going. I thought about all the times I'd been the one to reach out, to smooth things over, to pretend her absence didn't wound me." "I didn't think it mattered," I said quietly. She flinched, and for a second I saw something flicker across her face. Remorse, maybe, or the first sharp edge of understanding. "It mattered," she whispered. We stood there, neither of us moving, the quiet stretching between us like a thin thread. I felt no urge to close the distance. "Not yet. I know I haven't been fair to you," she said finally. "I know I've failed at being your daughter." I looked at her, really looked, and realized she was just as unsure as I was, just as frightened of what honesty might cost us both. When she sat down at the table, I moved to the cupboard and took down 2 cups. I filled them with tea, steadying my breath as I set one in front of her. Laura cupped the mug in her hands without drinking, her gaze fixed on the steam rising between us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I could feel the weight of everything unspoken. All the years of careful distance, the hollow places we had learned to pretend weren't there. "I kept thinking I'd make time," she murmured finally, her voice soft and unsteady. "I thought there would always be time." I rested my hand on the table, not reaching for her, just letting it be there. I wanted her to see I wasn't angry anymore. Not exactly, just tired of waiting for something that might never come. "I know," I said, "so did I." Her shoulders trembled, and she pressed her lips together as if holding back an apology she didn't know how to shape. I didn't rush to fill the quiet. I had learned in these past weeks how much could grow in silence. "I don't want you to think I don't care," she whispered. "I do, I don't know how to be close anymore." I looked at her and felt a small, surprising swell of compassion. Maybe neither of us had known how to be close. Maybe we both forgot how to show up for each other. "You don't have to know," I told her. "You just have to try." Her eyes lifted to meet mine. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I saw my daughter as she once was, uncertain, hopeful, a little afraid. Full. Ow. I took a slow sip of my tea, feeling the warmth steady me from the inside out. When she finally reached across the table, her hand covered mine, light and tentative. I didn't pull away. For a while we sat like that, neither of us pretending everything was fixed, but both of us willing to be here. Later, when she stood to leave, she paused in the doorway. "Where will you go next?" she asked softly. I smiled, already picturing the map I kept tucked in the kitchen drawer. "Everywhere," I said.